Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christopher Sullivan. I'm the Deputy Official Secretary to Her Excellency the Governor, and it's a great honour to welcome all of you here in the ballroom at Government House, but also to our audience joining us online across this wonderful state and further afield. And can we start by actually thanking the musicians from the New South Wales Army, the Australian Army Band, for their wonderful entertainment they're providing tonight. And I may not get another opportunity for this tonight, but just also to remind you all that tonight's presentation will actually be available on the Royal Society of New South Wales YouTube channel following this evening's presentation. So you can jump online, refer it to others, and watch it again and again and again. For those of you here in the ballroom who are able, will you please stand for the arrival of Her Excellency, the Honourable Margaret Beazley, Governor of New South Wales, and Mr Dennis Wilson.
For all our old friends here, you know this is the time, sit down, relax. For our new friends, welcome. And as is our tradition at Government House, I welcome you in the language of the Gadigal, Wujuri Gamarua, Dian Babana Gamarada. We are on Gadigal Nara, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. To say that computer technology has engulfed our world is like telling this audience in particular that planet Earth isn't flat. Although I'm able to confirm that membership of the Flat Earth Society is free, that joining up is simple, and as at 2010 it had 189 members. At least that's what I learned from Google. I would also posit that even in this learned audience, there would be some who would be surprised at the extent to which computer and digital technology at the best, and often at the very best, facilitates, but at the worst, controls not only human interaction, but many aspects of the everyday functioning of our society. Sometimes referred to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, my own sense is that we are actually in a new and incomparable era. Many of the benefits of this new era would have been unimaginable in 1822 when John Babbage, with funding by the Royal Society, designed what many consider as the first computer, and possibly not even in 1973 when the first commercial microcomputer, the Micrel-N, came onto the market. Today, many of these benefits are aspects of everyday life to which we give little thought. Digital phones, the internet, Google, that ready-at-hand encyclopedia of anything and everything. Robotic surgery, which some of you here in the room may even have experienced. The Service New South Wales app and its QR code that got us through the doors of department stores during COVID, and which facilitates the renewal of our car registration, our driver's licences, and the payment of some of our taxes. Internet banking, and a little more exotic technology such as robotic security guards and robotic receptionists. AI infiltration of the creative arts space has raised concerns of a different nature, and as a teaser to you all, I'm going to suggest that you Google Queensland Symphony Orchestra, QSO, AI, and read the associated articles that will really tell you how AI can and perhaps ought not to operate. These and other challenges of technology, including its worst aspects, will undoubtedly be the subject of some interesting discussion tonight. But by way of introduction, I would like to briefly refer to the reach of technology in areas which may not be so familiar to you. It's a bit of a shopping list, and I won't dally too much on the detail, but look, I found it interesting. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you. So, recently, AI Steve, an AI chatbot, ran for Parliament in the constituency of Sussex, encompassing the towns of Brighton and Howe in the recent UK elections, under the banner of the Smarter UK Party. I kid you not. AI Steve's human counterpart was Steve Endicott. The concept involved AI Steve having conversations with the voters in Brighton and Howe. to ascertain the concerns of as many constituents as possible. He could get around to a lot more than was the case with traditional door knocking. If elected, the real Steve would represent AI Steve in Parliament. The real Steve explained that this campaign was a human-AI collaboration, and indeed he described AI Steve as his co-pilot. AI Steve garnered 179 out of the 52,572 votes cast. So whilst not elected on this occasion, I'm assuming that AI Steve might well say, but watch this space. The tech company OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, recently discovered 5 operations based in Russia, China, Iran and Israel, which was using its technology to manipulate public opinion. By this year's end, there will have been more than 64 elections worldwide. 2 recently concluded, France and Britain, and of course the 5th of November is really and seriously just around the corner. So OpenAI instanced an example of an Israeli company called Stoic, which used OpenAI's technology to target social media accounts with pro-Israel content about the war in Gaza. Now, regardless of whether or not this involved fake news, and I have no way of knowing, it was at the least a myopic representation of a very complex situation, demonstrating the danger of the misuse of technology particularly to an illiterate and unsuspecting audience. The impact of the threat of AI political influence is much more than a ripple on the surface of already troubled waters. Law enforcement has become another area where technology is being used frequently. In the US, one county has introduced a software product to draft police reports based on auto-transcribed audio on body-worn cameras during police operations. Now, these reports, at the moment anyway, are restricted to minor incidents, and it is claimed will significantly increase police efficiency, given that individual police officers in the United States anyway can sometimes spend up to 40% of their time writing up their reports. And the claim that is made is this will prove to be one of the most impactful of our time to help scale police work and revolutionise the way public safety operates. We can hope, but we might have to wait and see on that one as well. In New South Wales, child pornography is subject to a classification system from 1 to 5. Now, any form of child pornography is serious, but the level of depravity which is involved at the higher end of the classification is beyond any reasonable sense of human comprehension. The impact on the police officers undertaking the classification is really shattering, and we've spoken to many of them. Now, AI is being used to classify the material in the first instance, subject to a human verification sampling. The reduction in the amount of material that has to be physically viewed by police officers is thus significant, and there will have to be, it's obvious that there will be a corresponding benefit to the mental health of the officers undertaking this onerous but absolutely essential work. But it also needs to be said that it has been the technology that has been the great enabler of the proliferation of child pornography in the first place. Fortunately, still, for every technological advance, one can find the ingenuity of human or even anthropomorphic intervention. Australia now has 13 technology detection dogs, not to track your Google usage, but it is used to detect various tech devices, including SIM cards, USBs, so be careful where you throw them. But very significantly, most recently, found the phone of Samantha Murphy near a dam at Ballarat. And for the readers of yesterday's Australian Financial Review in hard copy, pages 11 and 12 had 3 articles on AI, one of which had the headline, Artificial Intelligence, Final Nail in Coffin for the Creative Sector. So I'm going to finish there because that's really just, as I said, a bit of a shopping list, and you undoubtedly all have your own shopping list and have encountered the uses of AI in various ways, both positive and negative. But I am here to warmly welcome tonight's speaker, Julie Inman Grant. Following 2 decades working in senior public policy and safety roles in the tech industry at Microsoft, Twitter and Adobe, Julie was appointed in 2015 as Australia's eSafety Commissioner, a pioneering role leading the world's first government regulatory agency committed to keeping its citizens, that's us, safer online. She was recently named one of Australia's most influential women by the Australian Financial Review and a leading Australian in foreign affairs by the Sydney Morning Herald. Earlier this year, she had the distinction of being named the Australian Censorship Commissar. We quite liked that, especially because guess who called her that? Elon Musk. Highlighting the irritation that some tech giants experience when governments seek to regulate content to protect the safety of their citizens. Julia, we are honoured to have you here. We look forward to hearing about your work in that world that the wide web weaved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you here tonight. I would also like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. First, let me begin by thanking Her Excellency, the Honourable Margaret Beazley, Governor of New South Wales, and the Royal Society of New South Wales and Susan Pond for inviting me to speak to you tonight. It's a great honour, not least of which because the speakers who have stood here before me are an impressive who's who of accomplished Australians of all walks of life, from politics, academia, science, and the arts. I'm humbled to join such an incredible group of people, and I look forward to our conversation further tonight. But on to this evening's theme, put to me by the Governor, how a single letter changed the world. When I first turned my mind to this intriguing idea, I must admit I wasn't entirely sure whether it should be a letter of the alphabet or it should be a letter with a world-changing message, whether written by hand or by voice recognition or keyboard or even AI. So tonight I've hedged my bets on it, and I will highlight a pivotal example of each. I'll start with my chosen letter, W. It represents one of the most important world-changing inventions in human history. And no, it is not the wheel. In fact, I'm actually cheating a bit here, but repeated 3 times, W becomes that famous acronym for World Wide Web, a development which changed everything irrevocably. And it continues to exercise its transformative influence to this day, endlessly reinventing the way we live, work, play, and communicate. Now that would be enough in its own right, but I feel like I cannot talk about the web without at least acknowledging another important letter. In this case, an open one, appropriately dispatched by email. While not as instantly transformative as the World Wide Web itself, this late-night missive generated quite some discussion and debate at the time and influenced the early philosophical underpinnings of internet governance. Principles technology companies still hold on to doggedly to this day. But before I delve into that, I need to provide a little bit more context. There is no disputing that the World Wide Web of today is a truly remarkable thing which pervades almost every aspect of our lives, so much so that I think every one of us here would struggle to imagine our modern lives without it. But while it seems indispensable today, it really wasn't all that long ago that we were living in an analog state. While computers have been networked in one form or another since the 1960s, it wasn't really until the 1990s when the personal computers met the 50K bit modem that the internet really took off. Now, this game-changing devices finally brought the internet to the masses, allowing people to slip on a pair of metaphorical board shorts and really start surfing the web. While this was a time of great promise, many also felt that overregulation of this burgeoning industry would be an impediment to innovation and growth. Tech companies were moving fast and breaking things, and they wanted one thing from governments: to stay out of their way. and for the most part, governments around the world were happy to oblige. I know this time well, having worked at what I call Tech Policy Ground Zero in 1996 as a young lobbyist in another significant W, Washington, D.C. Of course, being the 1990s, I had big ideals, big shoulder pads, and even bigger hair, and eventually found myself working for an unassuming guy named Bill at a little software company called Microsoft. And it was Microsoft, AOL, Alta Vista, Netscape. Those were the big end of town in the tech world at that time. And we were looking to the future with our rosy techno-utopian glasses, and we only had eyes for the promise that this new online revolution would bring. Of course, it was Web 1.0, and social media wasn't even a thing yet. In fact, I think Mark Zuckerberg was about 12 years old and was probably thinking more about his next Dungeons and Dragons invention than he was creating the world's largest social media network. But with these rapid advances in technology and computing power just around the corner, the internet we were preparing for all those years ago would quickly outpace all of our imaginations. Around the same time I was walking those halls of the US Capitol, that other important letter that I mentioned earlier was being written on a laptop at a raucous party in Davos, Switzerland at the 1996 World Economic Forum. This open letter was now the famous Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, penned by American poet, cyber libertarian, and occasional songwriter for the US cult band The Grateful Dead, a man by the name of John Perry Barlow. In it, Barlow described a bold new vision of a completely free and open internet where people could reinvent themselves in this new virtual world with no government controls and no national boundaries. In short, governments had no place in cyberspace. While a revolutionary and somewhat controversial theory at the time, it was also an unashamed ode to a cyber utopia, focusing on the great promises this new world held for humanity while giving little thought to how it might be potentially misused to harm others, save for this one line. Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs, we will identify them and address them by our means. Now, I find this line compelling because I think it both mirrored and undoubtedly influenced how many of the tech leaders were approaching these issues in Washington, D.C. at the time. Like Barlow, the industry I was a part of then also wanted government out of cyberspace and pledged that if anything were to go wrong, they too would manage and moderate things themselves. And Section 230 of the United States Communications Decency Act helped enable and codify this, providing the industry with intermediary immunity from any bad acts or malicious content created by their users. So looking back, it was probably a little naive of Barlow and the politicians in Washington to believe that such a new and untested industry could be left to its own devices and be trusted to self-regulate. But even then, the compelling industry arguments that regulation would put the brakes on innovation, would halt economic growth and US tech hegemony were very hard to resist. Needless to say, Barlow's late-night email was one of the earliest examples of a viral online manifesto and is still widely shared today. Now, I was lucky enough to have a spirited conversation and debate with Barlow at an expat Thanksgiving party in London in 1997, but that's probably a story for another night in a lot less polite company. So, this brings us to another triple W, representing one of the key questions being asked about today's world. What went wrong? The views Barlow expressed in this declaration are emblematic of much of the public discourse that we've been having around the internet for decades and continue to have today. Time and again, governments have let their eagerness to reap the promised benefits of shiny new technologies blind them to any of the potential pitfalls, and we are still yet to totally reconcile this today. Whether it's launching a new search engine to bring information to the masses, a social media platform to give voice to those who previously had none, or disrupting an established industry to deliver better value and choice to the consumer, it is more than not born out of a sincere belief that whatever that creation might be, it will make society better. But I think today one could equally argue that many of these benefits have also come at great cost, not just to individuals, but to society more generally, especially when the race to be first to deliver the product to market continues to outweigh the responsibility to ensure that it is safe. The current industry scramble to be the first to bring artificial intelligence to the masses is just the latest example of this flawed technology ethos. And if we don't learn from our past mistakes and put the safeguards in today, I fear the damage could be wrought on society by these immensely powerful programs, and these could be irreversible. To that end, I do think 2023 was pivotal, where we really reached a tipping point when generative AI came so quickly into the mainstream that governments finally took notice not only of the long-term existential threat to humanity promised by the arrival of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, but of the immediate online harms we are already starting to grapple with today. 2023 was also the year that governments coalesced around AI safety, and a year when many other countries joined Australia by passing key online safety legislation and standing up independent online safety regulators, specifically in the UK, in Ireland, and across the European Union through the Digital Services Act. eSafety in 2023 also stood up and chaired the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, a formal body that will help ensure that cross-border collaboration and information sharing in online safety regulation will continue to happen. After all, the internet is global, whilst laws are local, and the only way we are going to encourage a very entrenched and powerful industry to start minimizing harms at scale is by working together. And the only way that we are going to create a safer, more civil online world is to ensure that the fundamental building blocks are safer by design. Now, in some ways, the internet serves as a mirror reflecting societal ills, but there's no doubt that it can also serve to amplify and even weaponize it. In this age of unbridled digital communication, modern society has probably never been more polarized than it is today, with public discourse and respectful debate replaced by increased intolerance and division, as algorithmic echo chambers reinforce and often provide false legitimacy to more and more extreme views. We are truly entering the age of digital divisiveness. Sadly, much of this outrage-driven engagement has been a by design guiding principle to keep platforms sticky, and with business models driven by paid influencers, surveillance advertising, and subscriptions, those who are the most outspoken and controversial stand to profit the most. As a result, democratic ideals and institutions have never been under such grave threat. The January 6th riots of the US Capitol building after Donald Trump's election defeat in 2020 gave us a really terrifying glimpse of the power and influence the internet holds over all of us, and just how fragile and delicate the fabric holding democracy and society together can be. And in some ways, this shouldn't have been a surprise. During his presidency, Donald Trump not only savagely abused foes online with impunity, but was identified as a major superspreader of mis and disinformation. However, his online audience was so sizable and his content went so viral that none of the major platforms suspended him for repeated policy violations, making excuses for vaguely worded exceptions for public figures. A 2021 analysis of 120,000 posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter found that there was just a small collection of only 12 individuals and their organizations responsible for the vast majority of anti-vax COVID misinformation circulating on the global internet during the lockdown. Whilst Donald Trump could not claim that dubious distinction of being named one of the disinformation dozen, another US presidential candidate, Robert Kennedy Jr., is amongst them. Again, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter failed to enforce persistent violations of their own House rules until the incitement of online violence so clearly spilled into real-world harm that they were forced to act. Even this past weekend, where we saw political leaders of all stripes condemning the political violence brought so clearly into focus by the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the unhinged fringe and conspiracy theorists spun mistruths more quickly than the government and journalists could uncover and report the facts. And this came from both the right and the left. So we saw a combination of trending hashtags of both civil war and fake assassination trending across social media in a matter of moments. And even so, we are blessed with instant access to almost limitless information at our fingertips, but we've never been more distrustful of it. Indeed, the online world is starting to resemble an ever-expanding desert of misinformation with very few oases of truth in which we can find refuge. Unfortunately, humans are going to have their critical reasoning skills even more challenged with the accessibility, ease of use, and low cost of powerful AI applications that allow anyone with a smartphone to create photorealistic deep fakes of people saying and doing things they didn't actually say and do. Deep fakes have now become cheap fakes that are easy to create and difficult to discern by even the trained eye. This costs virtually nothing for the perpetrator to make, but exacts a devastating, lingering, and incalculable cost to the victim survivor. And without content provenance requirements and an acceleration of accurate and rapid deepfake detection tools, there is a real risk that a deepfake could become the viral narrative before the real truth is revealed. And like many have said before, unbridled AI could not only upend free and fair elections and continue tearing at the fabric of society, but it could also ruin lives. And of course, the web and the technology that underpins it has enabled new kinds of abuse that didn't exist before its creation. While children have always been faced with the prospect of bullying, today's internet has made it so much pervasive and invasive, heightening the impact on a child. Where a child could once find respite by leaving the school gates, thanks to smartphones, social media, and messaging apps, bullying now follows children 24/7 into their homes through the smartphones on their pockets and into their bedrooms. eSafety administers the world's only youth cyberbullying complaint scheme, and we have a 90% success rate in getting this harmful content taken down when the platforms fail to act. But we continue to witness concerning trends. In the year to May, complaints about cyberbullying of children were 311% higher than the same period 4 years ago. Most of this continues to be peer-to-peer, but we're also seeing children as young as 8, 9, and 10 reporting cyberbullying to us. This is also part of a larger trend post-lockdown where parents were much more permissive with children and their technology use. Complaints about image-based abuse or the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, we do not use the terminology revenge porn, revenge for what? But it is 242% higher, primarily driven by sexual extortion reports. Now, as a result of this trend, the demographics of intimate imagery abuse have markedly changed. At the inception of our image-based abuse scheme in 2018, 70% of the image-based abuse targeted women and girls, often as a consequence of relationship retribution or sexting gone wrong. Today, overseas criminal organizations are targeting young men between the ages of 16 and 24 for large sums of money once they have tricked or coerced them into creating and sharing sexual imagery of themselves. In some very tragic cases, these young victims have taken their own lives rather than face the shame of seeking help from friends and family. Meanwhile, other forms of image-based abuse, including abuse related to family, domestic, and sexual violence as a form of coercive control, and the incidence of deep-faked image-based abuse have also surged. Reports of illegal and restricted content were 111% higher. Our investigators, as we run the Child Sexual Abuse Hotline for Australia, investigated 33,000 URLs over a 12-month period, with 85% concerning suspected child sexual abuse material. Last year, we reported another concerning trend. 1 in 8 of these complaints about this material now related to self-produced child sexual abuse, coerced remotely by a predator online, and often captured by the child themselves in their bedrooms and bathrooms of the family home, literally under their parents' noses. If you add to this the overlay of clearly definable harms that eSafety is seeking to tackle with tools under the Online Safety Act, the next generation of harms we have not fully reckoned with are already on their way. Whether it's the prospect of augmented telepathy or the robbing of cognitive liberty through invasive technologies like neural implants, we need to start preparing now. To be sure, the latest wave of techno-panic has been exported from the US and is already washing over our shores, warning that screen time is rewiring kids' brains and that social media is the sole cause of teens' anxiety and depression. I think we all know it's a little bit more complicated than that. But this was given more heft when the US Surgeon General recently suggested public health warnings should be applied to social media, much like those emblazoned on cigarette packets to warn of potential health risks posed. Some argue the tech industry is already acting like big tobacco and should therefore be treated as such, as the industry is accused of ignoring compelling research that shows the damage their platforms pose to children so that they can protect their bottom line. The debate may even see Australia swinging the pendulum more towards an interventionist camp of online safety regulation, with a media-fueled push banning children under the age of 16 from joining social media. I'd be very interested in hearing from our young people what they think about that later. While this will ultimately be a policy question for government, I think a much deeper debate needs to be had around what we mean by social media. Because kids aren't posting to Facebook like they were 10 years ago. They're using ephemeral media and short-form video and instant messaging and encrypted apps. We also need to think long and hard about what the unintended consequences might be of pushing kids into darker recesses of the web. I'm also concerned about the pursuit of forbidden online fruit, that it will actually deter help seeking by young people and prevent them from confiding in parents when things do go wrong online. And I can tell you that the evidence base is thin and the research very mixed on all of these questions. But the teens who are the most marginalized and vulnerable today are the most likely to be impacted by such a ban. Our research clearly shows that LGBTQI teens, First Nations youth, and those with a disability feel more comfortable and more like themselves online than they do in the real world. They depend on technology to connect, to explore, and to find their tribe. And to be honest, as Australia's regulator in this area, I'm struggling to get my head around the how in terms of successfully implementing such a policy. You see, I've been working on age assurance in one shape or form since 2008. And in 2023, I delivered an age verification roadmap to government. An age verification trial is now underway, and I've also given industry 6 months to create meaningful codes to prevent children from accessing pornography and other high-impact content up and down the technology stack, on devices, through app stores, in search engines, and on social media. But until these fundamental age assurance systems and technologies are in place, implementation and enforcement of such a ban will be virtually impossible. I think the best analogy I can give you in terms of my recommended approach starts with another W, as in water safety awareness. Australia has built and excelled in water safety over the past several decades, often in response to tragic circumstances. And this is important lessons for successful approaches towards online safeties. In short, we fence pools and we back them up by enforcement, but we don't try to fence the entire ocean. Our beautiful beaches, we protect our citizens from a young age, teaching them how to swim, to stay between the flags, and to recognize rips to avoid danger. We also put in shark nets to protect them from predators that might be lurking beneath the surface. But no matter how well we prepare our kids, we still keep a close eye on them in the water because we well understand the dangers. We should be using the same philosophy online. We need to ensure that our kids have the confidence and digital literacy they need to navigate online currents safely while teaching them how to spot the dangerous algorithmic rips and lurking predators. Parents should act as digital lifeguards to keep a close eye on our kids while still allowing them to dip their toes in the ocean. And our extensive parent content on eSafety.gov.au helps empower parents to do just that. So I guess this leads to the why eSafety was stood up as the world's first online safety regulator in 2015 and how we approach this work. As you can imagine, there was no playbook available for online safety regulations. We had to write it as we went along. At times, we've even written the playbook. But our approach and model is multi-pronged, beginning with prevention. Through our research, education, and awareness-raising programs, we strive to prevent online harms from happening in the first place. These start in the early years, as 91% of Australian kids are given access to a digital device by the time they're 4. We also know that over 65s are the least represented population online, and they're the most susceptible to social engineering scams. So we have our Be Connected program, so cradle to grave, if you will. But meaningful and lasting societal change takes time, and until then, Australians suffering harm will continue to reach to us for help. And this is where our protective powers come in. Under Australia's Online Safety Act, eSafety operates world-first schemes to protect young people from cyberbullying. We have a serious adult cyber abuse scheme and the image-based abuse scheme. Through these complaints-based schemes, we support individuals in the grip of a personal online crisis by compelling social media platforms and websites to take down abusive and harmful content. We also have remedial powers to target both the perpetrators and the platforms. And in my estimation, this is one of the most unique and important functions we have. We serve as a safety net and can remediate harm quickly when the social media companies fail to act. Our daily engagement with Australians gives us insights into concerning online trends, but it also provides us with ample evidence of where the companies are failing at a systems and process level. And I'll touch on our systemic powers around transparency codes and standards in a bit, but I want to touch upon the third pillar, proactive and systemic change, which is not enshrined in our legislation, but I believe is critical to us being an anticipatory regulator and in shifting the burden of safety back onto the platforms themselves. Key to this is the Safety by Design initiative eSafety launched in 2018, something we did with the industry rather than to it. We have to be realistic that we're never going to arrest or regulate our way out of online harms. So we thought it reasonable for companies to assess the risks up front, understand how the harms manifest against their users, and incorporate safety into every aspect of how they design, develop, and deploy their products and services. The best way to explain this approach I have found is through real-world analogies. So I'm going to take you even further back, more than a half century, to remind you of a young American lawyer named Ralph Nader, who began publicly questioning car makers' accountability for traffic fatalities, critically examining the intersection between vehicle design and a lack of embedded safety features like the humble seatbelt. His ideas culminated in a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, and this led to a new era of automobile regulation, still guided today by international standards. Predictably, at the time, the auto industry vehemently pushed back. They didn't want to invest in seatbelts or other safety features, believing that the ongoing costs would be prohibitive and would stifle both profits and automotive innovation. Of course, today we know that seatbelt alone has saved millions of lives, and we almost take for granted that every car is now brimming with life-saving technologies that are built in, like airbags or anti-lock brakes. In fact, today car manufacturers differentiate themselves in the marketplace based on their safety ratings, and consumers take note. Proof that safety sells. Yet despite the appeal to consumers and serious harms reduction, it took legislative bodies, including Australia as one of the first, around the world to compel the embedding of seatbelts into cars for these to become standard practice. There are certainly a number of comparisons we can draw here with the current state of technology regulation. I believe we are now fast approaching the tech industry's seatbelt moment, and not a moment too soon, as the new industry race has begun to bring AI to the masses and to be the first to colonize the metaverse. But history shows us that it is unlikely that companies will make this important transition to a safety-first technology voluntarily. Shiny new gadgets that please consumers and securing first-mover market share is pleasing to shareholders, so we'll almost always win out. We also see piecemeal retrofitting of safety features announced by press release with no data from the platforms on take-up or efficacy. And the simple truth of the matter is, if your platform has 50 different parental controls that a parent has to figure out how to toggle on, you haven't used safety by design as a fundamental development principle. And the only way you're going to make your service truly safe is if you re-engineer it. I'm looking right at the physics professor, of course. For this reason, Australia's Online Safety Act includes important systemic powers aimed at applying significant pressure on industry to bring about meaningful change, and that involves looking under the hood. The first of these are the basic online safety expectations, which include wide-ranging transparency powers that compel companies to answer key questions about how they're living up to these expectations for a range of online harms. Under these powers, we've sent 19 notices to 30 major services, including Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, TikTok, Apple, and X Corp, asking questions about how they're tackling a range of harms, including child sexual abuse, terror and violent extremism, sexual extortion, online hate, and harmful algorithms. Just getting these companies to finally lift the lid and reveal some of their inner workings is a win in and of itself. For decades, governments around the world have been asking these same questions with little success. We are now sharing this data with our international partners to help them better understand what is and is not being done. And it continues to be my belief that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Through the operation of these powers, we've seen positive online safety outcomes. Unsurprisingly, some of these changes have come about through the naming and shaming aspect of these powers, as it is generally reputation and revenue impacts that are more likely to move companies to the light rather than just regulation alone. We understand that this will be a constant battle, just as governments are achieving greater levels of transparency about what is actually happening within the metaphorical bowels of these platforms. We are in fact seeing movement from the major industry players to become more opaque, placing APIs out of reach, threatening litigation, personally targeting regulators and justices, acquiring and then deprecating potent social media monitoring tools like CrowdTangle are just the opening gambits. Governments need to continue pushing harder and staying a step ahead. Another way we are trying to get and stay ahead and encourage active systemic change is through the implementation of mandatory codes and standards to tackle online child sexual abuse and pro-terror material. As an example of another very systemic and significant win, 6 World Force codes are now in operation across 8 sectors of the technology ecosystem. While 2 of these codes produced by the industry did not meet appropriate community safeguards, I was able to use my powers to write the rules for them by moving to industry standards. These 2 standards cover broad groupings of technology services like cloud-based file sharing and photo storage services, gaming and dating sites, and messaging services. I cannot impress upon you how pivotal these 2 standards are in protecting children, as we know that cloud-based storage services and encrypted messaging are used widely by both pedophiles and terrorists to store and distribute this incredibly damaging content. These standards have been registered with the Parliament and, following the usual due process, should come into force around Christmas. But of course, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and dogged industry resistance to any regulation remains an ongoing challenge. For years, we've seen big tech businesses throwing their weight around down under, challenging Australia's approach to important issues like harmful online content, child protection, and even payment for news. The stark headlines are nothing new, nor are they unique to our shores, and we should not be swayed by them. For example, some high-profile industry members affected by our standards were so worried about the global implications of what we were asking them to do that they mounted what could only be described as a good old-fashioned fear campaign to sow public and policymaker doubt. While solely focused on forcing the industry to do more to prevent their services from being misused by pedophiles to harm children, one leading company, named after a fruit, even went as far as describing eSafety's draft standards as a dystopian dragnet, which would inevitably lead us down a slippery slope of mass government surveillance of ordinary law-abiding citizens. The pushback from encrypted services was just as fierce, despite eSafety being explicit that we do not expect industry to weaken or break end-to-end encryption. But we were equally explicit that it is no longer good enough for encrypted services to throw their collective hands up in the air and do nothing either. This is a form of willful blindness and serves as another example of an industry once again prioritizing profits and the privacy of adults to undertake any act in the dark without considering the dignity and the commensurate rights of children to live free from online violence and abuse. We can and we will weather the pushback from one of the most wealthy, stealthy, and powerful industries in modern history. And what other choice do we have but to continue standing up and pushing the regulatory barrow against this long-term technological exceptionalism? Now, part of the job of a regulator is to test the efficacy of the powers we have today. And those powers were certainly put to their first real public test in April of this year. I'm sure you'll recall, in the wake of the Bondi tragedy, there was a graphic, high-impact attempted murder video of a bishop delivering a live-stream sermon at his church in Wakeley. The attack was declared a terrorist incident by the New South Wales Police Commissioner by an allegedly radicalized teenager. In fact, more than 52,000 potential terrorist and violent content images were later found on his phone. No surprises there that exposure to harmful terrorist content will desensitize, normalize, and even radicalize impressionable young minds. Following the Christchurch atrocity, the government prescribed a very specific role for eSafety when a potential live-streamed attack like this occurs. We conduct rapid-fire online investigations to determine how far and how quickly this high-impact and gratuitous violence is spreading to determine whether or not it can be deemed an online crisis event. We then notify the social media companies of the content and assess what steps they are taking to stem its viral spread and to protect innocent eyes from stumbling across something that they would never be able to unsee. So our sole goal and focus is to prevent extremely violent content from going viral, and in the case of the Wakeley attack, potentially inciting further violence and inflicting more harm on the Australian community. And so, on the 16th of April, eSafety issued formal removal notices to Meta and X Corp, requiring both companies to take all reasonable steps to ensure the removal of this extreme violent video content. The removal notice identified specific URLs that our investigators identified where the video material was located on both of these services. Their responses couldn't have been more different. Meta complied within the hour, following up consistently with updates on the steps they were taking to ensure the abhorrent content was not reloaded and reshared. But as we all saw, X Corp not only refused to remove the content, but vigorously defended their right to keep hosting the video of a brutal attempted murder on its platform in the federal court, despite the fact that the video more than likely violated their own terms of service. And this brings me to one of the most disappointing W's of them all. While many companies do acknowledge their societal responsibilities in a moment like this, Some companies choose weaponization of their platforms for profit and warfare with regulators, or more accurately, all-out lawfare against those who may want to bring more safety and civility to their platforms, rather than to set any global precedent that compliance might create. X Corp is sadly such a company. In this case, its barristers deftly avoided addressing the harmful nature of the content, rather directly focusing instead on the more abstract concepts like the Comity of Nations, freedom of speech under the US First Amendment, and even whether or not a decision might be subjecting the federal court to international ridicule. As a result, we saw very clearly that there was a particular legal battle we were not going to win, so I chose strategic withdrawal so that my powers could be tested before the AAT. And fear not, the legal battles with X remain ongoing. We are involved in 5 more separate actions with X Corp, either in the federal court or before the AAT, including a federal court battle around X Corp's non-compliance with the transparency notice, asking questions about what the company is doing to combat child sexual abuse material and their failure to pay that infringement notice. And herein lies the rub. These companies have almost unlimited funds to tie regulators up in multiple lengthy and costly litigations. It's a strategy I like to call death by 1,000 courts, and one that they have repeated in other parts of the world. In fact, Elon Musk just threatened to take the European Commission to a very public battle in court this weekend for preliminary findings that X Corp violated the Digital Services Act for a range of deceptive design features. But this process for us unearthed a bigger and more fundamental question which all technology regulators and countries outside of the US will need to grapple with. If technology companies like X Corp are not answerable to the laws of the sovereign nations in which they operate and extract revenue, then who are they ultimately answerable to? An answer to this pivotal question is well beyond the boundaries of one piece of litigation or the jurisdiction of a single court, and will have sweeping implications for all digital platform regulators. We need to ensure that these decisions are made in the right forum with a broad range of decision makers. So how do we find a way forward? One thing that's clear is that the ability of sovereign nations to protect their citizens from harmful online content and conduct needs to be part of a global conversation. Perhaps it's a convention or a treaty or the equivalent of a Bretton Woods for cross-jurisdictional regulation of online harms. As mentioned, eSafety is aligned with other global safety regulators through a formal organization we formed, and we've just signed a regulatory MOU with the European Commission, a formidable bloc with plenty of regulatory heft behind them. But of course, the issue of regulation and sovereignty will likely continue to be challenging until the most significant jurisdiction where most of the global tech giants are headquartered, the United States, makes serious attempts to pass safety legislation and hold them accountable. Things did seem to be moving towards a positive trajectory with an emotionally charged US Senate Judiciary Committee hearing last January, but further progress has stalled. And of course, the outcomes of the upcoming US election can and will have reverberations for technology regulation, regardless of the outcome. How can they not? But importantly, while these court battles have been going on, the Australian government has also brought forward the Online Safety Act review, and I have no doubt that the recent experience with X Corp and any weaknesses exposed in our legislation during this case will be examined closely to ensure future legislation for this process. I thought it was interesting to note as I wrap up that Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa labeled today's tech CEOs as the world's largest dictators. Maria is someone I know and deeply respect, and she is tangled with real political dictators throughout her journalistic career, so she certainly knows tyranny when she sees it. But I think she makes a valuable point about a seemingly untouchable class of powerful and politically potent tech billionaires and their followers. When you really think about it, today's tech leaders wield almost unlimited power, not just over a single country, but over a captive global populace. They also don't just hold themselves above the law, but seem to exist completely beyond it, backed by almost inexhaustible financial resources. So up until his death in 2018, Barlow steadfastly stood by his declaration of independence of cyberspace. But I do wonder if he was still alive today and witnessed so much of the power and influence in the hands of so few in his cherished egalitarian cyberspace, whether he would start to have some second thoughts. The World Wide Web has undoubtedly changed the world, but we can't just continue to celebrate the good while turning our backs and ignoring the bad. This is a world we wove, or rather, a web spawned by the great US of A, and there haven't been any meaningful guardrails to prevent these harms. Think of how far the online world has come in the past 30 years from the dial-up days, and yet Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act has not been touched since 1996. Despite all that, there is hope, and I believe we are making quiet but solid progress with more countries and jurisdictions creating their own online safety regulators coming online, and we are no longer alone in this fight. eSafety was once the sole voice in the wild calling for change. We are now hearing these voices from others in the world echoing like a steady drumbeat. Safety by design is taking hold globally. Governments are asking global tech companies to prioritize safety and well-being ahead of tech profits and shiny new gadgets. And this brings me to the final and most important W of all, we. It is only really by working together and showing regulatory courage and cooperation across borders and jurisdictions that we can hope to change the technology game as it's being played today. Ever the optimist, I remain eternally hopeful that if we do this, we can wrest back control of this incredible world-changing invention and have a safer, more inclusive World Wide Web we all want, and in line with what its creators always envisaged. Thank you.
Julie, thank you very much. That was incredible. I don't know where the 45 or 50 minutes went, but they've gone.
I only saw a few people head bobbing.
Oh, no.
So that was good.
So I had a list of questions for the video. My name is Susan Pond, and I'm honoured to be the President of the Royal Society of New South Wales, which, in partnership with Her Excellency in Government House, have held ideas at the House, this now being the 10th time. And it hasn't disappointed. As you said, we've had amazing presentations, and yours is right up there in the pantheon.
Thank
it's
you.
Sort of my vote of thanks before we get to it. But I'm going to open it up to the audience. I'm not going to use any of my questions. I can see one up the back. There are microphones. If you could say who you are and ask a very short question, please.
Thank you, Susan and Julie. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation, and I'd thank you very much for the work you and your part of the government do to protect, our children. I was very interested in your analogy with the car industry, and having been working for one big large tech company for 27 years myself, saw the internet go from this nice utopic place to a place that also has a very dark side. And when you think about cars coming into the country, the government could have, to impose safety, dealt with those physical things by, insisting car manufacturers put seatbelts in them. Is there something we could do, and I'm just developing this idea as I was listening to your talk, we all access the internet through physical devices, so is there a way in which there's an analogy where we could, ask those manufacturers or insist that those manufacturers install safeguards in the way of software on those physical devices, analogous to installing seatbelts? I know it's not a perfect solution. There'd be lots of challenges, but I'm just wondering if there are some ways we can use our sovereign power to, to build in some solutions that might go some way towards solving this problem.
Well, the codes that I just mentioned actually divide the technology industry into 8 different sectors, and the phase 1 of the codes took almost 3 years to develop. And that's why I gave the industry 6 months. And we put together a paper for them where we basically said, we need choke points and safeguards through up and down the stack, on devices, through app stores, through search engines. So that's one way. With the Online Safety Act review, I suspect that there will be an approach around a duty of care, with safety by design being a fundamental element of that. And you're absolutely right. When we import Teslas into this country, we expect them to be built by Australian standards and to meet those standards, otherwise they don't come in. But this technological exceptionalism and frankly the jurisdictional arbitrage that we're being played will continue to challenge us. I don't know if you have seen that Andrew Forrest's litigation against Meta for the scams. He's taking it to California. So he's trying to kind of meet them where they are at. One of the technicalities in the judicial review that X-Corp is challenging us on is around Nevada incorporation law and whether or not that carries any duties for foreign jurisdictions. So I think a lot of people in government thought that jurisdiction question was answered, and I don't think it has been.
Can I ask one of the students in the audience if they have a question?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. We really admire the work that you do and really respect all the work that you do for us. We can't deny that the rapid rise of technological advancements certainly come with a lot of benefits, but as you mentioned, there's also misuse of technology. So how do you think us young people can help contribute to creating a safer online environment?
I think role modeling good digital behavior is the first step. First, I want to mention that key members of my staff are here, and I'm one person. I couldn't do it without them. But one of my special guests here is also Professor Joanna Weaver, who developed the Technology Policy Design Center at the ANU. People often ask me, when you grew up, did you always want to be the eSafety Commissioner? I was like, no, there was no internet, and I had no idea I was going to be living in Australia. But I think you find that you make your own luck. And I've been lucky to be in the right place at the right time, just when technology policy was happening in Washington, D.C., actually before there was an internet. I was working for my hometown congressman on a range of social issues, and he put his head under my cubicle one day and said, we've got this small little company in our electorate called Microsoft. Can you work on technology issues too? So I started working at the intersection of social justice and policy and technology before there was an internet. So that was lucky, and then I created a path. So do pursue an interest. A lot of people are turned off by technology, but the technology policy side is for those of us who are right-brained and want to bring that element of social justice to technology. And of course, legal degrees will help as well.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to close off the formal part of the evening, but before that, your passion is infectious. And the work that you're doing is extremely important. So thank you for sharing it with us tonight. Oh, don't go yet. I got a few more things I wrote down that I was going to say. You're in a world, we're all in a world where it's very difficult to determine in the Metaverse the difference between right and wrong, the tensions between transparency and censorship. So we applaud you for the work that you're doing. It's not easy, as you've demonstrated well, and we're all with you in the bigger society as we see the struggles, both in our children and grandchildren, and from the other side in the attempts to regulate in a world where the technology is far outpacing policy. And I was going to ask you, you can tell me later your biggest nightmare, which is probably that the technology is outpacing policy and the gap is probably getting wider.
It actually isn't. It's that,
great.
It's that someone will take their own life after they've come to us, whether being cyberbullied or experiencing sexual extortion, and we couldn't help them.
Yes, that's also, I'm sure you've got a lot of nightmares. So would you please join me in thanking Australia's eSafety Commissioner, Julie Inman Grant. Thank you.